This is Audible.
Is he nuts? Why a Gay Man Would Become a Member of the Church of Jesus Christ by Dennis Schleicher. Narrated by Dallin Bradford. Published by Cedar Fort. This is dedicated to all of the children and adults who have taken their own lives due to a sexual identity crisis. My heart goes out to their families and friends as I pray and ponder daily, hoping that they will feel the presence of the Holy Ghost. I pray that they will receive comfort and peace by continuing to believe in the restored gospel. This is also dedicated to my younger brother, Darren Scott Schleicher, my best friend and the most supportive in my family regarding my sexuality. I was so honored and privileged to perform your ordinances in the temple. It will always be remembered, and I will return to our Heavenly Father and you with honor. Foreword by Carraway, author of More Than the Tattooed Mormon and Wildly Optimistic. I don't fit the mold for anything. I don't fit the mold of how I look in my religion or my community, or what I'm trying to tackle and talk about and pursue. How can someone succeed when everything about them in their demographic implies that they shouldn't? It's like I was failing before I could even start. Sometimes fears are just in our head and we imagine the worst-case scenario, and that's enough to stop before starting. But not in my case. Mine was a reality. I couldn't go anywhere or post anything without those terrible stares, mean comments, rude remarks, assumptions of my hatred toward the gospel and toward God, emails saying I should end my life or that God could never love someone like me. It was a long time of loneliness and heartache and weight and judging and confusion and anger toward others, toward myself, and also toward God. How could they act like this? Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm flawed and just not good enough. Maybe it's not worth it. But then I just got tired, Tired of feeling down all the time. Tired of noticing and hearing all this negativity. Tired of not being myself. Tired of having other people tell me how my life should be. I don't have time to let other people's experiences and advice dictate my decisions. We're only living this mortality thing once, and we shouldn't let someone else pick for us. It was a lot of soul-searching and soul-stretching. It really was deep loneliness, painful sacrifice, and loss. I've never known real pain until then. Indescribable anguish. I've never struggled so long and so hard where my body would literally ache before, until I got baptized. Times where I felt like I was being punished. Times I felt overlooked, unimportant, forgotten. You're not alone in your wonderings. Like you, I also know what it is to wonder, to doubt, to struggle, to sink, to feel empty, judged, abandoned, unwanted, unworthy, tired, tried, alone, out of sight, unnamed, and unimportant. Like you, I know how hard it is, losing our voice, losing hope, losing strength, wondering where our place is, forcing ourselves to use faith we don't even know if we have or not. What if we got it all backward? What if all of this, all of our hard and unexpected, isn't for us to wonder and doubt, isn't meant to move us backward and slow us down? What if it's bringing us to something different, something better? Sometimes all I felt I had was this supposed God and a hope that what I was taught wasn't in vain. But because of it all, I know Him. Because of it all, I know God. And I love Him with a real love. And I couldn't trade that knowledge and relationship for anything. Because of it all, I've accomplished and embraced and tried and created and overcome and become because of merging my life with God. Because of it all, I am living a life I didn't even know was available for myself, a better one. Every time that I wondered where God was and if He really cared about me, each of those moments has brought me to everything I have now. It was every single time I was pleading for things to be over and for things to be different that has brought me to every single thing I have now, and it breaks my heart to imagine my life any different. And through it all, I have found me, the real me, who I was meant to be all along, and oh, what a feeling! And I dedicate myself to living a life I am excited about and I am proud of. I dedicate myself to my wanderings and my wonderings and my sacrifices and to the unexpected paths God has brought me down because I decided I was going to stop keeping God at arm's length. I decided I was going to allow myself to give God the opportunity to show me how great He really is. It was a lot of pushing my comfort levels and a whole lot of tearing down to undo and rebuild. It was a lot of honest conversations with my Creator. I desperately needed to see myself how God saw me, even a sliver, because I wasn't seeing it. But our efforts and our faith are never in vain. I have come to know that we see our differences as weaknesses or as setbacks. But what so many fail to recognize is that those aspects that make us different are what we need to grow in. It's our individual differences that make progress, success, and change for the better. If we were all the same, how stupid would that be? We as humankind literally wouldn't get anything done. Being a completely tattooed public speaker for the Church of Jesus Christ might seem ironic and impossible, but I'm doing it. I create, I write, I speak, I progress, I grow, I conquer, I win, I surprise. And I make things happen because I have never told myself I couldn't. And most definitely, I have never been told that I couldn't by my God. Because it is exactly my differences that have brought me to everything I have and am doing now. It is everything that makes me different that has made me help others and succeed into something far bigger than I ever could have imagined. What could our life look like when we give it all to God and trust, especially trust in the discomfort? When we hear that God is an unchanging God, we think that means His commandments are just unchanging. But that also means His love. His love for us is unchanging, never weakening, always there. And knowing that our God is unchanging means that our helping God will always be a helping God. That our God will always be a God of miracles, of mercy, of guidance, of revelation. Our unchanging God means that His love for His children is also unchanging. Our God will always be a loving God that is bound to His promises to us if we are trying in any degree. Beautifully written with great passion and honesty and humor, Dennis's story will bring you along for his journey to the reality of experiencing miracles and blessings and opportunities when we allow God to show us how great He really is. Dennis will show you how to embrace who you are and where you are, to embrace the unexpected, knowing who is guiding us and who is loving us. This book will show us just how life can blossom to us when we hold on to the reality that this is all true, that God really does live, that Christ really did die and live for you. We really are theirs. God loves us because we are His, and that alone makes us enough, worthy, and their whole existence is to bring us to the greater things. I do know that God loves me, and I am His son, whom He accepts without reservation. My faith in this one thing is what lifts me above the emotional storm clouds and helps me to soar through life. I have confidence. Dennis Schleicher. Chapter 1. The Punishment for Confusion. We need more kindness, more compassion, more joy, more laughter. I definitely want to contribute to that. Ellen DeGeneres. I grew up with a congregational church literally in my backyard. The summer view out the kitchen window began with my grandfather's tall, bright yellow sunflowers. The rusty red brick of the church rose behind them, topped by a stereotypical New England white cupola and a thin, metallic steeple piercing the clear sky. The white-framed windows were opened wide on Sundays, and the music of the hymns floated across the grass to my home. Our neighborhood cul-de-sac had been built on land owned by my great-grandparents, so we were surrounded by family. My grandparents lived in the house on the left, my great-aunt and uncle on the right. The church parking lot bordered my backyard and was a great place to ride my bike. It was a self-contained, peaceful little world. We never attended church when I was small, even though it would take less than a minute to get from one door to the other. I was in second grade when I pointed out the window at the steeple and asked my parents, "Why don't we go to church?" My friend Katie went to church there, and I thought it would be fun to have more time with her. The following Sunday, we walked out the back door, across the yard, and into the church building. Our family was immediately involved in the congregation, attending all of the suppers, fundraisers, picnics, and other events. My mother even held a key to open the church for special occasions and extra meetings. I was content. I loved the camaraderie and fellowship that occurred on Sundays. My family easily made friends with other families, and I got to see Katie a lot as we attended the children's Sunday school together. I learned about how kind Jesus was and how he wanted us to be kind to others. This was the basis of the good Christian values that would go on to form the bedrock of my life, though I didn't necessarily know it at the time. However, it seemed that we were only Christians on Sunday mornings during church services and when we had Sunday dinner with our extended family. On Monday morning, everything went back to the usual. The usual was physical abuse from my mother. She suffered from postpartum depression after having me, but the baby blues were not properly diagnosed then. It was just something that happened and had to be dealt with by the sufferer alone. From my earliest memories, I associated my mother with pain. Since I didn't know anything else, I thought it was normal, until my younger brother Darren was born shortly after I turned 4. My mother never laid a hand on him. Much later, during therapy, my mother revealed to our counselor and me that she did not want to mess up his life as she had mine. One evening, my father came into my bedroom and took 3 teddy bears off my bed. "This is Papa Bear, this is Mama Bear, and this is Baby Bear. What does Mama Bear do when Papa Bear leaves the house?" I smashed the Mama Bear against the Baby Bear. He assured me that he was going to make everything right, but that never amounted to much. He was never home when incidents occurred, so there wasn't much he could do. About a year after we started attending church, I was playing in the back parking lot with Katie when my mother started screaming for me to return home. I knew what was about to happen and dreaded it, but I had no way to avoid it. I was going to be hit, slapped, and screamed at for no obvious reason. When I came in the door, she grabbed me around my neck and started to jerk me up and down, lifting my feet off the floor. Her hands squeezed together on my trachea, stopping me from breathing. I gasped for air, desperately trying to scream, but no sound could slip through her fingers. All I could do was scream in my head, "Mommy, I can't breathe. You're choking me." But I wasn't as small as I used to be. I'd grown enough that I was able to break away and run to my bedroom, still having difficulty breathing. It felt like her hands were still around my neck. I could still feel the squeezing and how scary it had been trying to get a breath but not being able to. My mother was overcome with guilt and locked herself in her bedroom. I was still too terrified to leave my room, but I could hear her crying and moaning for forgiveness, and she called 911. My grandparents heard the sirens and immediately came to our rescue. My grandfather was able to convince my mother to come out and talk to the police. She was sequestered in the living room, and I overheard her telling the police that she had a problem. She couldn't control herself and stop abusing her son. My grandfather contacted my father at work, and within an hour he was home. That evening, my grandparents kept my brother and me at their house, providing comfort in their safe haven as they often did when they could hear my mother screaming from next door. The next Monday morning, my mother admitted herself into the psychiatric ward at the local hospital. She was there for 3 weeks and underwent electroshock therapy. Because of its debilitating side effects and arguable benefits, it is now used only as a last resort, but at the time it was a highly recommended treatment. When I arrived at school that same day, I was called out of class by 2 social workers from the Department of Family Services. They asked me so many questions that it took me hours to answer them all. But after all of those hours, I never saw them again, and nothing came of their endless questions or my honest answers. The early 80s was a completely different time. For those 3 weeks of our mom's hospital stay, my brother and I stayed with our grandparents. I had always felt safe there with them, and our grandmother made sure that our school lunches were packed and we maintained our usual routine as much as possible. I'm Gramps' firstborn grandson. I was always a grandpa's boy. Memories of riding in his truck, going on our way to his construction sites, always provided a feeling of joy. He taught me a lot about being responsible, through demonstrating his hard work ethics through managing his contracting business. I always marveled at the fact that my grandfather could take a wooded field and turn it into a beautiful middle-class neighborhood. I loved going to the construction sites with my grandpa, and I will always cherish the memories from those weeks they took us in. After my mother returned home, she approached our church's pastor and shared our situation with him. She mentioned to him that she had lost her father when she was a toddler, and that perhaps growing up in a single-parent home had affected her emotional state. He recommended that she join a support group held weekly called Friends of Shanti. It was not part of the church services, but the group had permission to conduct their meetings in the church building. It was founded by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a world-renowned psychiatrist best known for changing how the medical profession dealt with people who were dying and the support their families received. My mother became good friends with her and quickly became one of the facilitators for the local group. The group had a New Age metaphysical undertone. I recall my mother asking me to go to the backyard and find a rock so that one of her friends could read the energy from the rock and predict my future. At 10 years old, I was young enough that this did not confuse or alter my views of Christianity. I thought it was all the same, people being nice to each other. The adults in this group became like family to me, as it was the first truly peaceful time I experienced in my life. We still attended the congregational church behind our house, and life smoothed out considerably. My mother stopped physically abusing me. She had a great support group of friends who offered help and guidance. I was in therapy as well, with the same New Age group. When I was in the 3rd grade, I was registered into Cub Scouts, and that further expanded our family social circle. My parents became friends with my Cub Scout leader, Lynn, and her husband, and our family spent a lot of time together. Lynn also ran a Bible study group that she invited my mother to. Life was fine and dandy for a few years, until I was in 7th grade, and one of the women at the Bible study introduced my mother to a new religion. The flourishing faith called Born Again, or Pentecostal, was much like the Billy Graham Crusade or the 700 Club, which were huge televised evangelical church services. My mother slowly detached from the congregational church and shifted her attendance to a different church. She also tried to convert her New Age friends to become born again and accept Jesus Christ into their lives as their everlasting Savior. If they didn't choose to accept Jesus Christ into their hearts and lives, she believed they were going to be condemned to hell for eternity. When they were not receptive to her witnessing zeal, she abruptly ended all contact with the Friends of Shanti, including all of the therapy I was accustomed to receiving through them. Even though this group had supported her through overcoming her abusive behaviors, Mom completely rejected them, since her new faith deemed their beliefs the work of Satan. She got frustrated and abruptly stormed out of the room. I had spent time with adult friends for years, many of whom intervened in my mother's struggles to avoid abusing me, but now I was told it was inappropriate to visit them. Ever. After we got home, Mom rounded on me, and for the first time in a long time, I could see a flicker of the old, angry Mom in her face. Though this time, she did it with a fake smile. In a low but stern voice, she said, "Those people are of the devil. Their beliefs are evil, and you are never to visit them again." I didn't listen to her. For the first time in my life, I started to rebel. These were the same women who brought my mother refuge and provided me with a safe haven. I couldn't just let go of that stability, and for the first time, I didn't allow my mother to take it. I went behind her back, secretly meeting some of the women on a regular basis. There was a woman named Sandy, whom I grew extremely fond of. Before her new change of heart, my mother would pawn me off on her when she needed alone time. Sandy was in school, studying to be a child psychologist. She would take me to the movies, amusement parks, art fairs, and craft shows. She was truly one of the kindest, most caring individuals. Sadly, she was a victim of sexual abuse by a family member. This is what made her so compassionate about my own situation. Many years later, when my mom found out that I was still staying in contact with Sandy, she exploded in rage. She demanded that Sandy come over to the house. When she arrived, my mother had members of the church seated in the living room, and I was asked to come down from my room to join. I could feel the tension building as 6 people started to gang up on Sandy, threatening her with a restraining order, accusing her of molesting me. Inside, I was frozen. I could not believe what I was witnessing. My own mother was blatantly and falsely accusing an innocent woman of molesting her son. Sandy tried everything to maintain her composure until she couldn't take it any longer. That's when I jumped in. "Mom, this is beyond inaccurate. How low can you actually go, knowing everything Sandy's been through, sharing with you her deepest family nightmare, and now you have the audacity to use it against her?" No response. No reaction. Nothing. My mother stood firm, as if she truly believed her own lies. That's when I knew I had lost my own mother to what I felt was an occult society. My father was not pleased about this new conversion, which he considered just a drain on the finances. He wasn't happy primarily because my mother was writing checks to the new church. He pulled my brother and me aside and said that it was a phase our mom was going through and it would pass. Or not. About a year later, I came home from hanging out with friends and walked into the house to see my father standing in a circle with a bunch of my mother's friends from her new church. They were speaking in tongues and screaming, "Praise Jesus! Hallelujah, Jesus! Accept Jesus Christ into the heart of Raymond." It crushed me to know that I had just lost my father the same way I had lost my mother the year before. Instead of their religious conversion enhancing our home and lives, my relationship with them became more confrontational and tense. They were more combatants than parents. Let the escalation begin. This was not exactly what I had in mind for my teenage years. With my father now thoroughly entrenched in this newfound religion, parental religious brainwashing became the new normal for Darren and I. For my part, I wasn't buying it. So I started spending more time away from home, going to the library, immersing myself in after-school activities, the one staple I still had left. I continued to attend the same congregational church as always, but now only with my grandmother. I was sad that the family photo for the church directory was eventually just me, a family of one. I felt a definite connection and camaraderie within that religious community that I wanted to continue, and I wanted to be a good Christian boy. I had an internal intuition that my parents' newfound religion was superficial and showy. I felt it disrespected God to be hollering, "Jesus, save me," while jumping around and waving arms. I figured that my parents were trying to be good people of faith, but this particular church affiliation didn't sit well with me. Chapter 2. A Study in Contradictions. I firmly believe that we cannot tolerate discrimination against any individuals or groups in our country. Such treatment always brings with it pain and perpetuates hate and intolerance. Barbara Bush. Content warning. This chapter depicts a violent hate crime. Through the ups and downs of my parents' faith journey, there was an undercurrent in my life that I didn't know how to deal with. I knew it was expected that as an adult, I would have a beautiful home, a wife, and children. From a young age, I was aware of that societal expectation. When we were little, my friend Katie and I played house together. We flipped through catalog pages, choosing patio furniture and other home accessories. It would be like the TV sitcom Leave It to Beaver. Lots of people thought Katie and I would get married when we grew up. But I had one huge problem. I always knew there was something different about me. As a child, I did not identify it with a particular word. However, my life revolved around a word that had not yet been introduced into my vocabulary. Others weren't so blind, though. When I was in 4th grade, my class was lining up to go to lunch. One of my male classmates was standing in front of me. Several other students noticed me staring at his rear end and started to make fun of me. "Yuck, that's disgusting. Dennis was staring at another guy's butt," one said. I was so shocked and frightened that I made extremely sure that I never stared at another boy at school again. In 7th grade, we had a substitute teacher. Some students were calling her a lesbian, gossiping and mimicking her. I asked another teacher what the word lesbian meant. She pulled me aside and asked why I wanted to know, so I shared with her what the other students were saying about the substitute. She said, "Dennis, the word lesbian is defined as a woman who has romantic feelings for another woman and engages in a same-sex physical relationship." I replied, "That's just like the word gay stands for two men loving each other." "Yes." I knew right then that from that moment on, I would be battling with my feelings toward other men. Because I was still so young, sexual orientation had never been specifically explained to me, but children are neither deaf nor stupid. I had heard enough from the adults around me, as well as from other children and teens, to know that homosexuality was considered bad, abnormal, and deviant. I underwent a terrific struggle within myself. I could not conceive of identifying myself as gay because just the idea disgusted me, as I had been taught that it should. But the thought that I might be gay was becoming more and more prevalent in my mind. So much so that within a week I was on a frantic rampage to find pornographic magazines to convince myself that I could be physically attracted to females. I rode my bicycle to neighborhood stores asking if I could purchase Playboy or Penthouse. Since I was a minor, no one would sell me anything. I did not give up. I had a friend at school whose father read dirty magazines. I gave my classmate $1, and he handed over a whole stack of them. All of the magazines had risque photos of women in them, but some featured similar photos of men as well. I walked home that evening, went up to my room, closed my door, and desperately tried to find pleasure in ogling the photos of the women. But the longer I stared, the more obvious it became. Nothing was happening. I became angry and hurt that I could not desire something classified as normal. I also felt deeply betrayed because the attraction I felt for the men in the magazines confirmed what I didn't want to believe. Frustrated and confused, with incontrovertible evidence still before my eyes, I believed there was something wrong with me and questioned my basic self-worth. My mind was a hurricane of thoughts. Why would God make me like this? If it's so wrong, why do I feel it? I didn't ask for this to happen. I've done everything I can. Tears rolled down my face, and I hoped with my whole soul that this attraction was nothing more than a temporary phase, because I wanted nothing more than for the feelings and thoughts to go away. As you can tell from the title of this book, they did not go away. And during my preteen and teen years, I had fantasies of holding another man close. Falling asleep at night, holding my pillow, I thought about having a relationship with a man with whom I could feel safe, comfortable, and in love. I imagined waking up next to him and hoped that there was someone out there waiting for me, as I would only settle for a monogamous relationship. I only allowed myself to think about this during private moments at night. I was still very much conflicted. Internally, I thought of how wonderful it would be to have a family with another man who accepted me exactly as I am and loved me for that. Externally, I knew that to be socially accepted, I needed to find a nice gal, settle down, and start a family. I know now that this is what causes so many men and women to enter into heterosexual marriage even while knowing they are gay, because they want to be accepted by their families and friends. I continued to suppress my feelings, ashamed and scared that my fellow students would identify me as different or gay. And I tried to walk the walk, as it were. During my freshman year of high school, I met my first girlfriend at a mutual friend's birthday party. We talked between classes at school, held hands, and did the usual things that teenagers do. With one exception. I was never able to convince myself to give her a kiss. She broke off the relationship 2 weeks later. That same year, it was time to start attending confirmation classes. Even though my parents had switched to the Pentecostal church, I still continued to attend the Congregational church. I got up every Sunday morning and put on my best clothes, an ironed polo shirt, dress slacks, and penny loafers with argyle socks. Confirmation classes were after school on Mondays, with lessons from the scriptures about being a good person. You would think that my parents would be proud that their son was committing to following Christian beliefs, went to church every Sunday, and even devoted Mondays after school to learn the teachings of God through the Bible. Nope. On the outside, all appeared normal. What happened inside the house was a different story. One Sunday in particular, my parents asked me to go to brunch. I agreed, but instead I was taken to a Sunday afternoon session at their Pentecostal establishment. I was placed in a room with the doors locked and confronted by many pastors stating that I did not have Jesus Christ in my heart and that I would not receive everlasting love and acceptance into heaven. I think there was some suspicion on my mother's part that I might be gay, even though I did not accept or understand the mere thought of it in myself, and I had certainly never mentioned it even being part of my life. I felt my parents had joined an organization that used brainwashing techniques to find your individual weaknesses and offer a solution that only they could provide. Shortly after that, I woke up late for school on a Friday morning, flustered and worried. My parents said they were keeping me out of school to take a day trip to the shoreline. I was baffled that my father was home from work on a weekday, but proceeded to get in the shower for what I thought was to be a fun day with my parents. I was a very organized teenager. I ironed my clothes every Sunday night to last me through the week. I knew exactly what I was going to wear: a black polo shirt and khakis. When I was done showering, I opened my closet to find a lot of my clothes missing, including my planned shirt. I turned to my father. "What's going on?" "Calm down, son. It's going to be okay." I had a gut-wrenching feeling that something wasn't right. After we were already in the car, they said I was being committed to a psychiatric hospital for troubled teens to receive correction therapy. Correction for what? Was this really about faith and church attendance? Did they suspect that I'm gay? At the facility, I learned that a psychiatrist and psychologist I had never seen had signed paperwork certifying that I was a threat to myself and others. There were some discrepancies as dates, times, and years did not match certain records. Apparently, my parents had someone from their church with the appropriate credentials create the documents stating they had multiple visits with me, when in fact we had never met. I was mortified when it also came to my attention that my mother had a meeting with my confirmation class, telling them that I was going away to seek mental health conversion treatment, and with that help, I would come back a different person. After trying to explain to the institution that I was wrongfully committed, I knew I had no hope other than prayer and guidance from our Heavenly Father. I frantically tried to find people I could trust to believe my story, but to no avail. I realized it was time to fake it till you make it. I had to pretend to come around to the conclusion that I would join the Pentecostal church, but asked that my parents please allow me to continue my confirmation with the Congregational church. After the confirmation in May, I would switch churches. I knew I couldn't have this revelation overnight, so I had to act slowly. 6 weeks later, I was finally released. To this day, I still thank God that I did not go through any kind of electroshock therapy, as I saw the damage it caused my own mother. Lights, camera, action. Returning home was an internal emotional roller coaster. I was now the director on set, performing new parts every day that had no scripts, only improv. Every scene was filled with a rotating cast of characters, and acts like the Three-Ring Circus was in town. My poor brother was so quiet and reserved. He didn't know what to think. In May 1988, I was confirmed into the Congregational church and allowed to receive my first communion. It was a magnificent day. My parents threw a huge party, and over 60 family members and friends attended. I felt like it was a bar mitzvah or pre-wedding party. Everyone was there to celebrate my statement of commitment to God. I did not, as I had promised, begin to attend the Pentecostal church with my parents after my confirmation, and the pressure picked up again. I wasn't conforming to what they wanted. There were repeated instances of my parents basically blackmailing me to go to church with them. They would invite me to go on outings with them and then drive me to their church, just to be screamed at by religious fundamentalists about Jesus saving me from myself. I continued to hold off even when my parents threatened to have me committed to the psychiatric hospital again. I'd had enough. The movie Irreconcilable Differences gave me the idea of divorcing my parents, so I learned what I needed to do to become emancipated and given rights in a court of law to be my own legal guardian. But I had to wait until my 16th birthday, which wasn't until that August. A few days after starting summer break, my parents became aware of the fact that I wanted to become emancipated. I even recalled overhearing my parents talking with members of their church about sending me to a camp in Missouri. My own mind was spinning out of control. If I end up in Missouri, I could be stuck there until I'm 18. A discussion elevated quickly to an argument that caused me to fear being locked up prior to turning 16, preventing me from separating myself from my parents. I felt that I had no choice. I ran into the garage to grab my bicycle and started riding to a friend's house. I was officially a runaway. I was fortunate to have the great network of friends that had previously been close to my mother before her Pentecostal conversion, and they took me in. One couple even considered sending me to California to stay with their extended family to wait out the last 2 months before my 16th birthday, until I could be emancipated. August 1988. My high school social worker, my best friend, and a few adults from my support network took me to juvenile court to plead my case in front of a judge. I was able to prove that I was responsible to take care of my own needs as a legal adult. I now had all the rights of an adult. Oh my goodness. It was my 16th birthday, and I now had the legal rights of a 21-year-old. As I entered my sophomore year in high school, I was my own legal guardian. I rented an apartment from one of the families in the Friends of Shanty group. Since we were so close to New York City, I was already working occasionally as a model for print advertising and TV commercials, and had enough income to support myself. The school administration had no clue what to do with me. I was an active member of many school clubs, including the French Club, Russian Club, Future Business Leaders of America, DECA, Distributive Education Club of America, a club that fosters business activity and marketing, and the Drama Club. I was the president of the Human Relations Council, a group of students who helped integrate the 76 different nationalities we had in our town. The only minority we were never taught about was the group of individuals classified as having same-sex orientation. It was not even discussed. Through these clubs, I developed many friendships, especially with a girl named Julie. We became best friends, and I found great joy having her in my life. Because we were attached at the hip, people perceived us as an item. But one thing was missing between Julie and me. We never kissed, never held hands, never shared a physically intimate moment. One day, Julie and I were watching our favorite show together, The Oprah Winfrey Show. The episode featured 2 male bodybuilders and well-known weight trainers, one of whom had previously won the Mr. Universe competition. It was their coming out show. I couldn't believe that right there, in front of my very own eyes, were 2 drop-dead gorgeous, masculine bodybuilders openly saying on national TV that they were gay. The only portrayals I'd seen of gay men on screen, TV or movies, were over-the-top cross-dressers, extremely effeminate men, or unattractively fat and bald men. This was a total surprise. For the first time, I realized that openly gay people look and act as normal as everyone else. The exaggeration of walking with a hip-swaying sachet was just for TV. But I had to put up a front for Julie. She started giggling and said, "Yuck, that's disgusting." I replied nervously, agreeing, "All of this is horrible. How could anyone do that?" I was so fearful that she would see my interest in these 2 beautiful men, but I could not take my eyes off the screen. I knew at that time I couldn't confess my true feelings about my sexuality to Julie. For her part, she may have suspected already anyway, since we never had any physical contact, but had no idea how to ask. I tried to maintain a relationship with my parents, even after moving out of our family's home, and occasionally went there to spend time with them. Sooner rather than later, it was all in the open. October 11th has been designated National Coming Out Day, and I was at my parents' house watching TV with my mom after school. I certainly had not planned to say anything to her, but that day, the Oprah Winfrey Show had a presentation about LGBT people and coming out. My mom wrinkled her nose. "They are all going to hell. That is so disgusting." I looked over at her and stopped myself from rolling my eyes. "Really? You think that's disgusting?" "Yes, I do. They're going to hell. It's in the Bible." She stopped and stared hard at me. "You're gay, aren't you?" It was a statement, not a question. I hesitated, but I had nothing else to say. "Yes." "I knew it!" she burst out. "I always knew it. Your father is going to be livid when he gets home." I wasn't there when he got home. My mother wasn't the only person to figure it out. 2 weeks later, on October 25th, 1989, I walked into the men's room at school. 15 boys were present, although a rule said that there should only be a maximum of 8 students at a time in a restroom. A hall monitor was outside reading a book. I was using the urinal when I heard several derogatory comments behind me. That should not be allowed to live. Suddenly, someone kicked me in the back, smashing my face into the wall. Other boys shouted, "People like that should not be allowed in this school. That is lucky I don't hurt him." Suddenly, all of them started screaming the slur at me, almost like a chant. I tried to get away, but they blocked the door and shut off the lights. I was cornered in the dark bathroom with 5 attackers taking turns punching my face, jaw, and stomach. Blood was pouring down my neck, onto my clothing and the floor. Another 10 or so boys were yelling and cheering them on. As soon as the hall monitor opened the door, I was picked up by my shirt and thrown out of the lavatory by one of my assailants. The monitor, scheduled to retire at the end of the week, tried to stop the attackers, but he was too fragile to even hope of stopping them. The attackers poured out of the doorway screaming, "I'm gonna kill you!" Fearing for my life, I scrambled for the mace on my keychain and blindly sprayed as much as I could in the direction of my attackers. With the barrage halted, I ripped myself away and bolted for the administrative offices. One of the secretaries handed me a towel to stop the bleeding, and another called security while I hysterically stammered out what had just happened. When the guards and administration arrived, I was still hyperventilating from pain and severe shock. I tried to catch my breath and explain, but the vice principal interrupted me. "I don't care. You should not have gone around Mace Happy." Stunned, I sat down outside her office. I overheard her talking to the hall monitor, saying that this incident would never have occurred if I dressed differently and made out with girls in the hallway. I was forced to wait an hour in the administrative suite before I was escorted into the nurse's office. The reason, I found out later, was that the boys who had so cruelly beaten me were being taken care of first. The vice principal finally came to speak to me. "You're lucky we don't have you arrested. We're going to suspend you for a few days." Then I was dismissed to go to the hospital to be treated for the multiple injuries I received during the attack. This second attack by the vice principal was on my mental and emotional capacities rather than my body, but it was just as real and just as debilitating. I had survived being viciously beaten by a mob, and now I was abandoned by the school administration that should have supported me. I had to drive myself to the emergency room, and the rest of my high school education was in jeopardy. While I was suspended, I was contacted by the local newspaper in a television news program. I never learned how they knew about the attack, but they found me and interviewed me about the attack and the administration's response. I did not seek them out. After the school system found out about my interviews, an administrator called me and said politely, "Why don't we get together? There's no need for you to go to the newspapers. We can work this whole thing out." I never mentioned to any reporter the words gay bashing or that I was attacked for being gay. I was still in denial about my own sexuality. I did confirm that I had sprayed mace in self-defense after being brutally attacked. The following morning, I was allowed to return to school. However, because of the hate-filled threats I continued to receive, I was assigned a security guard to escort me to classes. Rumors were flying throughout my school of 1,800 students. I was not allowed to use the student lavatories. I had to use the faculty restrooms. After school officials saw me in the media a second time, I was told that I would be put on homebound tutoring, receiving 10 hours a week of instruction to fulfill my curriculum requirements. How could 10 hours be enough to compensate for a week's worth of schooling? What would I do without interaction with my friends? What would happen with my participation in all of those after-school clubs I belonged to? Who was going to be the president of the Human Relations Council? I agreed because I was led to believe that it would only last a month or so. However, all of my extracurricular participation was simply taken away from me, and I remained on homebound tutoring for the rest of the school year. It got worse after I appeared on national television. At the end of December, I received a phone call from a producer of the Sally Jesse Raphael show, then a prominent national talk show, asking me to appear and tell my story. I said no. I would rather drop dead than tell the whole world that I was the victim of a gay bashing. I called my school social worker, who had also helped with my emancipation proceedings, to tell her about the request and that I had declined their invitation. She said, "Do you realize that in the past year, 57% of all crimes committed in public high schools and 33% of all suicides committed by teenagers were based on sexual identity issues?" The mental light bulb flashed on. Could I accept my own sexual orientation for the purpose of helping others? What if I could help even just one person? That would matter. Besides, I reasoned, how many people were actually going to see the show anyway? Most people I knew had full-time jobs, and all my classmates would be in school. I had no idea how many people actually watched Sally Jesse Raphael, nor did I think about that new invention called the VCR. I was naive enough to genuinely believe that nobody I knew in real life would ever find out. It went viral without the internet. The show aired on January 19th, 1990. I'll never forget the guest who appeared at my side as I told my story. She was Mary Griffith, the mother of Bobby Griffith, who was an All-American boy. And he was gay. He was faced with an irresolvable conflict, in that his mother and her faith taught him that to be gay was wrong, and he couldn't accept who he was. So, at age 20, in 1983, he chose to take his own life. His mother, who had been very militant in her faith and had prayed that her son would be healed from homosexuality, was traumatized by his suicide. By the time we appeared on TV together, she had transformed herself into a national crusader in behalf of gay and lesbian youth. Oh my goodness, the team producing this show really knew how to get the ratings. Placing Mary directly beside me after the commercial break was definitely not coincidental, as I talked about my fundamentally religious parents not accepting or approving of what they called a chosen lifestyle. Sometime between the taping of the show and when it aired, I received 2 phone messages from an officer with the local police department. The first message said that it was urgent that I contact her. The second message said, "Dennis, there is a warrant out for your arrest. Either you turn yourself in, or I will be forced to come and get you." I was charged with 5 counts of assault and 2 counts of risk of injury to a minor. Allegedly, 5 people were infected by the fumes from the mace I used in self-defense. I was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds. How could someone so small do so much damage to students who were twice my size, some of whom were on the football team? I was released on a $2,000 non-security bond. Because I was legally an emancipated minor, my parents were not obligated to help me, and they did not offer. I had to find an attorney myself. The case was brought to court, and I pleaded not guilty to the assault charge, which was a felony. After 18 months of continuations and numerous court appearances, the charges were dropped. I attribute this, in part, to my extensive media connections. My initial appearance on the Sally Jesse Raphael show was so sensational that Larry King Live from CNN took an interest in me as well and booked me for January 30th, 1990. Sally Jesse Raphael then asked me to reappear on her show on April 5th, 1990 to tell my story again. That led to appearances on 7 talk shows and reports in many newspaper articles, both locally and nationally. Although the media embellished a lot, much of what was said was the truth. I seized the opportunity to show others in similar situations how to stand up for themselves and what they believed in. This entire experience of the attack, the administration response, and the media reports and appearances had a major impact in shaping who I have become. Much of this ordeal could have been avoided had there been a law in place in my state against hate crimes. In 1990, such a bill was being considered by the state legislature. A lobbyist who was working to get the bill passed contacted me and asked if I would testify before the Judiciary Committee. I immediately agreed to do anything I could to ensure passage of the bill. The day finally arrived, and I walked into the legislative office building feeling nervous and empowered at the same time. The hearing room was packed. I waited for hours for my turn to speak, a span that seemed like days. Once I sat in front of the committee, I tried to read the notes in front of me, but was unable to. The frightening emotions of that horrific day returned in force and made my entire body shake. Amazingly, I did not cry, but instead summoned the strength to compose myself. I was determined to tell them everything. That I had been attacked by a gang of 15 students in my high school because of my sexual orientation. that they had not been arrested or disciplined in any way, and that I had been arrested for using mace in self-defense. It was all a blur. I was so emotional after testifying that I didn't stay to hear the results of the committee vote. I watched it on the TV news that evening. The bill was written to include all minorities, in addition to LGBT individuals. For example, it would be prosecuted as a hate crime with stronger penalties if someone painted a swastika on a Jewish synagogue, rather than treated as minor graffiti. The Connecticut Hate Crimes Bill took effect in October 1991. I am proud to have participated in the process that led to the enactment of this important piece of legislation. Had the law been in effect at the time of my attack, those boys could have been charged with a felony. As I compose this narrative, almost 30 years later, tears run down my face because I still have vivid flashbacks of the attack. I remember exactly what happened as if it were an hour ago. It makes me wonder about how barbaric people can be. When will this intolerance change? How does hate develop into such horrific violence against people minding their own business? Why do we have to pass laws to tell people not to hate? I don't expect everyone to accept who I am, but why do those who cannot accept LGBTs have to beat and bloody them to placate their hate for anyone different from themselves? I have been able to forgive those who attacked me in high school and called me names in the hallways while changing classes, the school administrative personnel who could not support me when I was struggling with my identity and in my time of extreme need, and those who just did not understand what it was like to be different. I found out who my true friends were, and I appreciate all those who stood behind me. We all have key events in our lives that bring us to new levels of understanding. These help mold the kind of people we become later in life. The attack and my time in the bright lights changed me forever. But that did not mean my new way of accepting my sexuality was strewn with flowers. In so many ways, I decided to be a survivor, not a victim, and to use the journey of my life as a source of inspiration to help others in similar situations. Chapter 3. O Beloved Brother. To love another person is to see the face of God. Jean Valjean. My brother, Darren, was the first person who gained a true understanding of who I really am as a person, who saw me as a beloved child of our Heavenly Father.